Okay, so to start this off, the background of all of this. I mean, the basic thing we have to work off is new Air Quality Directive. It's been mentioned several times this day. It pulls together all the various existing air quality reporting requirements and somehow manages to streamline this. So we've got the directive itself. Based on the directive, now implementing provisions have been put together. These were finalized last fall. Based on the implementing provisions, reporting guidelines are being put together. Still in draft status. This is what really then breaks down what individual pieces of information need to be reported. So this is the whole legal side. What do we need to support for it? And on the other side, we've got various relevant Inspire themes where we go through and say, okay, we've got some of it pertains to area management, some of it pertains to the atmospheric conditions and meteorological features. We've got the environmental monitoring facilities, which are contained in a lot of it. We have to reference the transport networks for some of it, and we've got all the various observational stuff. And the real challenge is how do we bring all the legal stuff and all of this scary UML stuff and somehow mash this together and come up with a nice, clean way of reporting all of this. So what are the required steps? What have I been doing to try and get all of this running? So the first bit is you take all of your various legal stuff which you're building up on. All of this must be reported. Analyze this. What do I need to provide? At the same time, the next step is to say, based on what needs to be reported, which are the Inspire themes which are really relevant. Not often an easy task because it's often a bit difficult to see what really goes where. For example, finding that the transport networks are under there really surprised me. Within the individual themes, you then have to go into more detail and say what are really the pieces of this theme which are really required for here. And then you start trying to map. So then you go through and say, okay, a lot of attributes, I've got these attributes I need for reporting. What can I map to the existing stuff? In certain cases, you're going to have to extend it. In certain cases, you're also going to have to extend what is finally reported, because Inspire will require some things which, while they're not in the legislation, they're not in the directive, they're not in the implementing provisions, but if the guidelines support everything which should be provided, some bits from Inspire will also be flowing back into these guidelines. And as a final step, once you've done all of this, you then have to provide a mapping. How do you get from the thematic concepts from the directive to this extended Inspire data model? So this is now going a bit into what is the scope of the current air quality stuff and already mapping what are the relevant Inspire themes we'll need for it. So, I mean, this isn't everything. There's a further bit on management plans that I've left away that is purely textual. This is all of the sort of the classical data reporting. Have the various air quality goals been met? And two of them, the assessment regime and the attainment, this doesn't really go into Inspire, so I'm leaving those out. But the other ones you still see in dark are all very closely linked to Inspire, and therefore their reporting should be based on Inspire. Where their interesting details, actually, the Air Quality Directive is one of the first ones which clearly states the data must be provided by Inspire. So the other ones are trying to adjust. In this case, they were very early adopters and said, do this, do it by Inspire. It also makes the timing very interesting because I think the first reporting will be 2014 for air quality. Inspire won't really be mandatory until then, so it's interesting timing. But now to go into the details of this scope and how I've mapped these to the various Inspire themes. So I mean, the first one was easy, data set zones and agglomerations, area management zones fits nicely. And we go in there and we have our basic area management restriction or regulation zone. This is exactly the feature type we will use to provide the air quality zones. Next bit was also fairly simple. You have various ways. You have to report how are you assessing your data. And as we see, there are basically 4 different ways of doing it. You can do it by basic measurement. You can do it indicative measurement, this is adding further bits. You can do it by modeling. You can do it by expert judgment. Fixed measurement is very obviously an environmental monitoring facility, which is got your station there and you're measuring the air quality continuously. So went into the EF thing and said, okay, what do we need? We need the facility over there. We're going to need the network. We need the observing capability, which describes how it's being monitored there and also various bits on what procedures were used and this information. And now I'm going to go into a bit more detail here, also really showing how this EF model is using this. So we've got our air quality station over there. And on this side, I've done what's called an instance diagram, where we really go through and say, these are the blocks of data, but instead of having what types of information they have, they really contain the actual values going in there. And so the very top block is saying, this is our environmental monitoring facility. This refers to the whole building. The second block is now referring to one explicit sensor in the facility. And this is now being pointed to several times because it's described once as a sensor itself. Then it's described via the observing capabilities, which this is a class we've defined. This gives you really explicit information. How is what being measured there? It gives you all the procedural information. It gives you what is being measured and where it's being measured. So that also points to the one sensor. At the bottom, we've got where I was saying the procedure. The procedure also, again, describes the exact methodology used by this sensor. And then we've got what's called the feature of interest in this observation terminology. It's what are you really measuring? And in this case, if you see over the building, you've got this little green bubble. And where we spent a long time going through and saying, what are we really measuring? What is this thing? And realize actually it's the quality of the air encapsulating the intake. So you've got the bubble there is represented then by a point which says, this is what I'm measuring. And one reason I've brought this is, remember the three boxes we have at the bottom. The third one we have at the left, at the bottom, is right, is also the property being observed. Because these bits we'll come back to in a few moments. So we've got, going from left to right, we've got the feature, which is the air bubble. In the middle at the bottom, we've got the process used for measuring the ozone concentration in this case. And at the right, we've got the fact that we're measuring ozone concentration. Now we're going to slip back a bit, say, okay, indicative measurement also goes by EF. Modeling actually goes more towards the atmospheric conditions because they're doing nice three-dimensional models of everything which, if you can use it for meteorology, you can use it for air quality. The other bit we have to add there are the transport networks, because actually a lot of the modeling, the traffic modeling, is then based on various road segments, and those should then refer to the roads used by transport. And then we've got the primary data. OM isn't really a theme, but I've added it here to show this is really where you've got the measurement data. So you've got the F parts really going into the measurement. That's now this bottom part we have in our EF diagram. And now we're going to go back to where I said, remember these three bits we were providing with the stations. Because the actual result, the three boxes in green up there, are the exact same boxes. They're the ones that have been provided with your facility, showing what is your facility doing. So you've got, again, your feature of interest at the very left. That's your little bubble in the green circle. In the middle at the top, you've got the process, so how was this really done? And at the top right, you've got, again, the fact we're measuring ozone concentration. And the scary observations and measurements result thing, which everybody is so worried about, are these two yellow boxes. So you've got one class which says I'm measuring at that location using this method and measuring exactly this one component. It has very little information. It has a bit of stuff, what is the time I have results on. And that then points to a result. And in the result, you then package, at least for this type of measurement, you package the time series. And if you look in there, it's a very simple, it's a bit more complicated in reality, but there's not much more than what is shown here. And what you provide there is the number of elements you have. In this case, we've got actually groups of 4. What they are, so we've got time, validity, actually, let's make this a bit bigger. We've got the time, the validity, the verification, and the fact that it's ozone. So it's always these quadruples, I guess you'd call them, for each individual measurement value. And then if you look at the bottom it's basically just a CSV file packed into it, into the XML. We always have these quadruples where, again, if you look at I've got 3 pieces there for 3 measurements. And the first bit is the timestamp. Tells you that on February 2nd of this year at 13 hours Central European time, there's a value there. It has validity status 1, it has verification status 1, and the ozone concentration is 0.95. And for an hour later, we've got the same thing, and for an hour later, we've got the same thing, and then I stop because it gets too big. But you can do the same thing with the values from the whole year. Works very nicely. So this is also to show the bits of how we're dealing with the data quality. Because providing data quality at a higher level doesn't work with measurement data. You have to have that down really with the individual measurement values, and that's where this information would be stored. So that's the one thing to take home for everybody. The other thing to take home is that the green part is really still part of the station description. The scary measurement stuff is the little yellow stuff at the bottom. Okay, and getting back to the track and getting back to how we're doing the reporting stuff, the final data set we have to provide is aggregated data, and this is again covered by the atmospheric theme, the environmental monitoring facilities theme, and again using observations and measurements, where further detail also goes into one of the morning questions. You can use it just as well for aggregated data. It isn't just the very primary data that comes off of a sensor. You can use it to then say, okay, the number of exceedances in this zone was 25, and the annual average concentration was X. So all of that is also covered by this data bottle. Okay, so what were we actually doing? I've taken the environmental monitoring facilities class. I realize that actually the last summer's version don't hold me to the details of this. It's changed minutely, but these slides were on hand. So we've got the basic environmental monitoring facility there, the way it comes out of Inspire. And at the right, we've got a list of concepts coming from the implementing provisions. This stuff needs to be reported. And what I've been doing to try and align these bits is, first step is saying, what can we simply map? So I went through and said, I don't know, name of the station is clearly the name of the station, and start date is the begin-end lifespan stuff, and the various geometry stuff, yes. Geographic coordinates all go into the geometry, so this is a clear case of direct mapping. In some cases, you're also mapping to the relation to a different class. For the air quality reporting, the station is supposed to refer to the network it belongs to. In this case, we have a facility, we have a network, and the attribute there is actually showing the relationship between them. But again, it's a simple case of mapping to what already exists in the base Inspire specification. Then there are cases where the air quality reporting requires things which aren't included in Inspire. That we've tried with the F theme to, since we have to support all environmental media, to make something which works for everything. Anything which got too thematic, we left out, because, I mean, then we have to define it for all themes, and we won't be done in 10 years. So in this case, stuff I've selected out for showing is there they want the name of the station also, so not just an ID, they want some real description. We have that. That doesn't matter. So they want the name of the nearest town, and they also want the national station codes. So these would be bits we would have to extend to the Inspire specification. And so I've been doing it as follows. We've got, again, at the left, we've got the environmental monitoring facility. This is the straight out of the box Inspire. On the right, I've got the Air Quality Directive station. And what I've done, I'm not sure how familiar you are with class derivation and all these bits, but what this diagram is showing is you've got one type at the left, the type at the right takes over everything from the left type, so it's totally reusable as the left type, but it adds the bits up in the blue frame. These were the various bits I identified which the reporting requires, but Inspire doesn't cover. And the nice thing about this type of extension is if you provide your reporting data like this, you're providing everything you need for reporting, but you're totally Inspire compliant. So it also goes to the questions of how often do I then have to provide the same data. If we're extending the reporting in this manner, you provide your reporting data and you've done your Inspire work already. Okay, and the final option of what sometimes happens is that there are bits which Inspire requires, but the reporting requirement doesn't really need. And in this case, within Inspire, we've said we need to know what type of media is being monitored. You want to be able to find, give me all air quality stations, give me all water stations. Within the air quality reporting, they know it's air quality. So, it's basically the difference between closed shop, open shop. As long as it's just air quality stations in this box, I know anything I pull out will be an air quality station. If I have all my environmental monitoring facilities in a big box, I either have to go into real details, or I have this nice attribute by which I can filter. But it's not in the reporting requirements. So this is one thing which will have to flow back into the guidelines of saying, there's this attribute on media monitored, and don't worry about it, put air in, everybody is happy. So, it's easy to cover, but as I'm also showing now again the guidelines, that the one row I've put in bold is a new one which we've now going to have to insert for the final version, saying, as we're reporting according to Inspire, please also provide this piece of information. Okay, and then the final step, once you've done all of that, is to again go through, say, what needs to be reported, and then provide a mapping for this. So I've just got the number and the name of the element from the implementing provisions, and then I've got the class within the extended Inspire specification it goes to, and then the XPath, which really shows you which individual field should be filled out with this piece of information. And based on this, it should then be fairly simple for the member states to provide this. So as a conclusion, the Inspire themes, they provide very nice basic building blocks which can then be extended as required for the reporting requirement. And do I write the same thing 4 times in different ways? Okay, in most cases you'll have to extend it since Inspire tries to provide the generic bare-bone basics. But the big advantage is that when you've done it by extension, you get rid of this double provision of having provided for Inspire this way, for reporting that way, and the like. That's it.